even with the benefit of jets and cars and railroads. Imagine doing 75,000 miles on camelback, on foot, in medieval boats. How many of us have visited 10 countries, much less 44? And how many of us could wrap our minds around so many different cultures, languages, foods, lifestyles? Really quite amazing. I'd like to do two things today, and one is to offer a kind of brief survey of Battuta's travels and adventures. But then I'd also like to contextualize it a bit in a sort of a broader historical context. It's not a coincidence that the greatest traveler of the Middle Ages was a Muslim. First, it was the ritual of the Hajj that got him started in the first place. That was the inspiration to begin traveling. And more importantly, being an Islamic scholar and a legal expert facilitated his travels at every stage, made it possible for him to set his experiences into some kind of framework. Among other things, it made it possible for him to get jobs everywhere he went. His travels really covered the length and breadth of the Islamic world at his time, and they also traced the boundaries and frontiers. Like I say, he encountered a lot of non-Muslim peoples, but he encountered them right at sort of the edges, the frontiers of the Islamic world. And this was a time of major transition for the Islamic world, too. The caliphate that we all read about from the Middle Ages, there were several caliphates, but the major one was the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad, had fallen apart some time before. And the entire Islamic world was broken into tiny little kingdoms, sultanates, sometimes just cities. So it was fragmented. There was no central authority. 400 or 500 years before, that entire area, or most of that area, was united under a single government. But at this point, it was completely fragmented. It was many different governments. Yet at the same time, Islam was spreading rapidly throughout much of Asia, east of the Middle East. I mean, we think of the Middle East as the heartland of Islam, and it's where everyone sort of turns to study Islam. But there's a whole other aspect. There's a whole other sort of chapter in Islamic history, which is the spread of Islam to South Asia and Southeast Asia. I suspect most of you are originally of South Asian origin, your families anyway. Well, how did your distant ancestors become Muslims is an interesting question. And for that matter, Islam was spreading through Africa as well. So there were many, many parts of the world that were recently converted. Within around 100 years before Ibn Battuta's travels, these places had converted, and or many people in these places had converted, and they were slowly sort of assimilating their knowledge of Islam from people from the Middle East, like Ibn Battuta. One major shift was, of course, the Mongols had about 100 years before Ibn Battuta devastated the Middle East. But what happened to the Mongols after they conquered the Middle East? Well, most of them converted to Islam. So they conquered it, destroyed much of it, and then actually assimilated. So there were several huge Mongol kingdoms that Ibn Battuta visited, which had become Muslim. There was also China, which was also controlled by the Mongols and had not become Muslim. And there was a lot of Southeast Asia that had slowly, where Islam had made inroads largely through trade ties. So there were new Islamic states springing up all over the place to the east. One of them was the Sultanate of Delhi, where Ibn Battuta found employment for a long time. And they were actually eager to attract people from the Middle East, legal experts, religious experts, and so on, and administrators. My point is that, I guess the main point I'm trying to make is that the context is that the old idea of a single unified Islamic state had already died away by this time. But Islam was rapidly expanding to the east, to new places, new peoples. People were sort of reforming their ideas of what it meant to be a Muslim in this new sort of multi-ethnic world that they were living in. And Ibn Battuta's accounts provide a kind of snapshot of this interesting era. Okay, let's see. Of course, because we started late, I'll just see how I'm doing on time. kind of a summary of his journeys. Yeah, I don't know how much can be assimilated this quickly, but just to give you a sense for how far this guy traveled. First of all, he was an Arabic speaker, but he was partially of Berber origin. Actually, not a lot is known about his background, because he doesn't talk about himself that much in the Rekka. But he was from Tangiers, which in English makes him a tangerine. That's actually a word for something from Tangiers. I've always liked that. You can describe him as a tangerine, sort of rolling across the wood. And he was from a family of Maliki scholars. Again, the Maliki branch, the Maliki school of Islamic law, which dominated in the West, in Morocco, North Africa, and the Andalus. He left for his first pilgrimage to Mecca in 1325. I'm just going to use the common era dates. You can look them up at one of those online converters later if you feel like it. At the age of 21, which is pretty young, which suggests two things. One, that his family was reasonably wealthy, and two, that he planned to study on his way. This was like going off to college for him. He was traveling to the east, not only for the pilgrimage, but to learn, to master his understanding of Islamic law. So this is his first journey straight across North Africa. Well, it starts as pretty straight across North Africa. He eventually got to Egypt, which was dominated by the Mamluk Sultanate. I'll just mention it briefly in a moment. Then on up to Syria. He tried to cross the Red Sea. You can kind of see down here the obvious way to get to Mecca and Medina would be to cross from the Red Sea, but there was political unrest, so he had to go all the way on up to Damascus and then join a caravan of people coming down. Pilgrims traveled across North Africa in caravans for safety, and they had to allow years for the journey to get there and back. When you think about the difference between the Hajj now and then, enormous difference. I mean, now you book plane tickets, maybe you worry, well, am I going to be able to get a few weeks off from work? That kind of thing. In those days, you had to basically invest years of your life. You had to really, at the very least, a couple of years to get there and back if you were from North Africa. And it was a dangerous trip. But the other thing is you could rely on a certain amount of charity and gifts along the way from people, because everyone understood the difficulty of this endeavor. Just the trip from Tangiers, thank you very much. Just the trip from Tangiers to Alexandria, about 2,000 miles, took him 5 months. So yeah, quite an arduous journey. In Alexandria, he had the first of a series of mystical experiences. I mentioned that he was a Sufi. In a lot of places he visited the local Sufis. Well, in Alexandria he met a Sufi master who predicted that he would travel all the way to India and China, and also predicted that he would there meet 3 other famous Sufi masters. And at this point, Ibn Battuta, in his account, writes, "I was amazed at this prediction, and the idea of going to these countries having been cast into my mind, my wandering never ceased, until I had met these 3 that he named and conveyed his greetings to them. So he did in fact meet these people that he claims there was this prediction for. Of course, you wonder whether it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. When somebody tells you, I foresee you're going to go to India and China, maybe then you feel like going to India and China, I don't know. But this is the first of a series of mystical experiences he had, and that's a very important part of his travel account. So let's just see. He came to Egypt. This is Al-Azhar University, of course, in Cairo. And much of that, including the minarets, were built, in fact, during the Mamluk period when he was visiting. This is a page from a book on horsemanship and, what it means to be a knight, what it means to be a mounted warrior from the Mamluk era. The Mamluks were originally slave warriors, brought mostly from Anatolia, it's now Turkey, down to Egypt. But eventually they took over the place and became sultans in their own right. Let's see. So, yeah, as I said, he couldn't cross the Red Sea.